Good evening and welcome to Global Harmony House, our Insight program on Thursday night. And this is December 3rd. Welcome to the darkness of the calendar time. And to bring us some light, we have some special guests with us. And so, without hesitation, I would like to invite our MC for the night, Sister Michelle. Would you take us away?
I will take you away, Brother Eric. Thank you so much, Eric. And welcome everyone to our ongoing Thursday night conversations. And it is a beautiful evening. I feel it. But it's ironic. It is a time of darkness, but also a time of great beauty and light. And tonight's session is called It's Time to Lighten Up. So we're going to embrace the light, but we're also going to lighten up. And we're going to learn to stay in the moment, which is so important. We have a very special guest speaker tonight. And her name, she comes all the way from Chicago. Is it as dark there in Chicago? I don't know. It's a time difference, so might be. It's very dark out here. And that is Sister Mary Friedland. Hi, sister. How are you?
Hello, good. Happy to be here.
Is it dark in Chicago?
It's dark, yeah. It's dark. It gets dark suddenly. It's light and then suddenly it's black.
Right, you have an hour
So
time
we
difference
still
there.
have our Diwali decorations up, and so the lights are on, and we're in the mood.
Well, welcome. Welcome to Harmony House in our Thursday night conversations, our Thursday evening insightful conversations. So just to give a little background on Sister Mary, she has practiced Raja Yoga meditation with the Brahma Kumaris since 1987. Wow. She enjoys experimenting with the principles and methods of Raja Yoga meditation to achieve higher levels of clarity and freedom in her life. Professional, she has worked in the field of education as a classroom teacher, corporate trainer, textbook editor, and yoga instructor. She attended University of Illinois and has a master's in special education from Northeastern Illinois University. And while living in San Francisco, in the Brahma Kumari Center, she was on the staff of the Interfaith Center at Presidio. She currently resides, as we had mentioned, in Chicago and teaches meditation and courses in spirituality throughout the United States. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from you. Welcome again, Sister Mary.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I really liked this title of both your theme for the month, which is to be in the moment, and also the title for tonight's program, which is Lighten Up. I had a brother who used to tell me lighten up a lot because I was very intense, and it used to really annoy me because if I could lighten up, I would. That was a long time ago, and now having studied Raja Yoga, I've learned a lot of the principles of lightening up, but I think it's really good to revisit these basic principles from time to time. So I'm happy to take up this topic with you tonight. And when I first looked at the topic, I thought of this concept of enlightenment. Even before I was on a spiritual path, I was always fascinated with this concept from the East of enlightenment. And I grew up as a Catholic. And so we had all over our churches, we would have pictures of saints, and the saints would have a halo of light over their head. And I wanted to experience that light. And I will say that when I was first introduced to Raja Yoga and I learned that I am a point of light and that point of light radiates light, that made total sense to me. And in a way, it was the first step of the fulfillment of this desire. But there's another meaning of the word light. And of course, that's light meaning not heavy. So this topic tonight, lighten up, it's a really good way of looking at this process of enlightenment, because truly the process of enlightenment is also the process of lightening up. So this is what we'll look at tonight. We'll look at inner lightness. We'll look at how we lighten up inside. And what does this have to do with being in the moment? I think most of us would agree that whether we feel heavy or we feel light depends on what kind of thoughts we're having. The feeling comes from the thoughts. So, excuse me. So, for example, if you were to get a letter from your landlord and the letter says, everybody in your building is going to get free rent for the month of January. Not a difficult question. Would you be heavy or would you be light? We would be light because suddenly you feel that you're relieved of the burden of having to pay January rent. Now, rent may not have felt like a burden. And this is the thing about burdens, is we accumulate them and then they feel normal. And we don't notice that they're burdens until we're relieved of them. So when suddenly you're relieved of the burden of having to pay January rent, we feel light. What can I do with this money? Maybe I want to save the money. So that makes us light because we have been relieved of a burden. And now let's say that the next week you get another letter from your landlord. And in this second letter, the landlord says, everyone's rent is going to be increased 20%. So now this letter doesn't make us feel light because we weren't expecting an additional burden of the rent. And maybe we can easily afford that 20% increase, but still it feels like an added burden. And so it makes us feel a little bit heavy. And then after we pay that rent for a few months, we get used to it. We're not complaining anymore. It's just numbers. But still that feeling of heaviness remains a little bit. And so an interesting thing about lightness is when we feel light, it's a very subtle feeling. And it doesn't last for a long time. But when we feel heavy, the feeling of heaviness can go away, but a little bit of that feeling of heaviness accumulates day after day after day. And then at some point we realize we need a holiday. But now we can't get holidays. We have to stay at home. So we'll look at this process of lightening up. How do I stay at home, sit in my chair, not do anything, not go anywhere, but lighten up? So different kinds of thoughts. One type of thought makes us heavy. Another type of thought makes us light. And we have lots of different kinds of thoughts during the day. If you have a job, you'll have lots and lots of thoughts about your job. If you don't have a job, you still have responsibilities, so you have thoughts about that. And whether we live in a big place or a small place, it's going to require maintenance, and we're going to have thoughts about that. So thoughts about the material world, when they accumulate, they create some weight, they create some heaviness. And if we have lots and lots and lots of these kind of thoughts, they definitely make us feel heavy. Another kind of thought we have during the day, generally, in our mind, we kind of review some things that happened yesterday or the previous day, things that people said, things that I did, just kind of the general category of thoughts about the past. Now, these kind of thoughts tend to make us heavy as well. And then another kind of thought that we have is we project what has to be done, what has to be dealt with, what has to be addressed, what has to be resolved, who I need to call, etc. Thoughts about the future. These thoughts also related to the material world, and they also make us feel heavy. So, what kind of thought makes us feel light? Now, I gave one example of your landlord tells you your rent is free for 1 month. So, okay, that makes you feel light for a short amount of time. But what is a kind of thought that gives us a sustainable feeling of being light? What kinds of thoughts can support a life of feeling light? One thing I'll say about that kind of thought, first thing I'll say about that kind of thought is that if we are in the moment, being in the moment, it means we're not tied to the past, we're not tied to the future. We have no burdens when we're in the moment. And so this is the kind of thought that makes us feel light. We're not hanging on to anything when we're in the moment. This is the kind of thought that makes us feel light. So what are the kinds of things that we hang on to? Well, if I'm thinking about something that you did yesterday, probably it's because I'm hanging on to it. Many things that happen over the course of the day, we don't hang on to. They never come onto our mind again. But certain things from the past do. And sometimes we hang on to things for years or decades or a lifetime. So all of these things from the past that we're hanging on to definitely make us heavy. And some other things that we hang on to are our preferences, our expectations, our desires, everything that we want to happen in the future. And it can be quite complicated. So this is a burden also. This also makes us heavy. And so we need to get out of this habit of accumulating things from the past, and then even accumulating things from the future. Because as I said, to be in the moment, you can't hang on to anything. So the first thing that we have to understand is, who is it who hangs on to things and who is it who doesn't? Now there's just one me, but there are actually two characters who live together inside of our heads. One character has a name and the other character doesn't. We gravitate towards the character that has a name. The nameless character is a little more mysterious, but it's the nameless character who lives in the moment. But first we'll look at the character with the name because that's more familiar to us. So for me, the character with a name is called Mary. When I was born, I was given this name Mary, and as I went through life, I constructed this character with the name of Mary. And why did I have to construct this character? Because I didn't really know who I was. And so I looked at what other people thought of me, what other people told me about myself, what I learned about myself through my activities, and then based on my interaction with the outside world, the material world, I constructed this character. And this character, maybe when I was 4 years old, this character was quite simple. It didn't have much baggage. The Mary character didn't have very much baggage. A mother, a father, couple of siblings, a bed, a teddy bear. That was not even school, no television back then. So very, very simple. But as time went on, this character named Mary started accumulating more and more. Friends, more siblings, more toys, school, homework, sports, grandparents, holidays. And also this character named Mary started identifying with certain activities. So for example, this character named Mary was a good student. And this character named Mary was very shy. And this character named Mary was mother's helper at home. And this character named Mary loved riding a bicycle. So started identifying with certain things. And as this character named Mary grew and developed, started accumulating a really complex identity. And now this character named Mary is a senior citizen. And you can imagine all of this stuff that's accumulated. And all of that stuff, sometimes I feel like one of those street people who walks around with a shopping cart. Is every place I go, I've got this big cart with everything that I own in it. My identity, my credentials, my education, it's all in this cart. And I take it everywhere I go. I even take it when I go to sleep at night. So this is the constructed character. And this constructed character, of course, has a name, has an identity, has a bio. It was a very nice bio that you read. I gave you a very short bio. I didn't realize you wanted a longer bio, but somehow you found one anyway. So this character has a history. Very good. However, this character has a lot of baggage. So if you remember, I said when this character was very young, this character was very, very shy, would blush if I got called on by the teacher in class. I would get so self-conscious. So this character named Mary didn't really like talking to maybe more than one or two people at a time. Now, somehow this character named Mary changed the identity, because here I am giving a class now. Life experiences required the character to change an identity. So that shyness isn't there anymore, but there's still the underlying feeling of insecurity, which might come out in different ways. This is the baggage of the character. And so when this character goes to give a class in New York, which I think I did once in person or once or twice a long time ago, but there's a certain amount of anxiety involved now because of this. The character named Mary isn't shy anymore, but still there's this underlying insecurity. Is it going to be a good class? Am I going to project properly? Are people going to be interested? So this is the character. This is one character who lives in my head. And this character has a lot of baggage, which the character carries around all the time. And the baggage makes the character heavy. So let's look at the other character now, the nameless character. This is the character we learn about in Raja Yoga. We learn about the soul, and we learn that while the body has a name, every body has a name, soul doesn't even have a name. So how do we get to know this soul that doesn't have a name? And we learn, we learn the soul is energy. We learn that the soul is light. We learn that the soul has these core qualities, very good core qualities, very high quality, positive energy. And we learn that the soul is eternal. And this is a really important learning, that the soul is eternal, because eternal means timeless or beyond time or no passage of time. And so for the eternal soul, there's nothing but the present moment. That's all that there is. And I think if you were present at the beginning of this program, when there was meditation, guided meditation, and beautiful images and music, that all of these are designed to evoke the awareness or awaken this inner being. And so since this inner being doesn't even have a name, we call this inner being, sometimes we call this character the inner being, sometimes we say the higher self, Sometimes we say the true self. I like the term true self because it reminds me that the other one is constructed. The other one is a creation of mine. But the true self or the eternal self has certain qualities eternally, whereas this constructed self, and the spokesperson for the constructed self is our old friend, the ego. The ego, on behalf of the constructed self, nothing is permanent for the ego because the ego identifies with the material world, the body and the material surroundings. That's all the ego can comprehend is the material world. And so everything is always changing for the ego. And so the ego, the poor ego, is fundamentally insecure. So of course it's going to have all this baggage. Of course it's going to carry all this stuff around because the poor character is insecure all the time. And the character is insecure about certain things that happened in the past, and the character is insecure about certain things that may or may not happen in the future. And so it gets tiring. And if we can understand there are these two characters at play all the time, and whenever we have to deal with the material world, whether it's our job or it's washing the dishes or going to the post office, the ego says, I'll do this, I'll take care of this, because the ego is an expert on the material world. That's its only world. But things like happiness, peace, well-being, ego doesn't know much about this. Contentment, lightness, the ego doesn't know about this. These are all in the domain of the true self. And so this is why we meditate, because we want to experience this other dimension, the dimension of lightness. And so if you were present at the beginning of this program and you participated in the meditation, now maybe when the meditation started, you still had some thoughts going on in your head about your job if you work today, because we can't just switch in a second from working to meditating. Mind isn't that way. So maybe initially there were some thoughts about your job, or maybe initially there were some thoughts about dinner or another person in your space. But slowly, as you focus your awareness within, things started to change. You started to feel lighter. You started to lighten up. You were getting enlightened by participating in that meditation. This is the process of lightening up. Now, definitely, we don't want to be light only when we meditate. We want to be light all the time. But this is kind of the core practice of lightening up. And I'll talk about a couple other differences between these two characters, the true self and the constructed self. So one difference between them is, and you can refer to this meditation that you just did, the true self sustains itself with very high quality energy, very high quality thought. Sometimes these thoughts are described as high frequency vibrations. They create lightness because of their refined quality, because of their high frequency. Thoughts about peace, thoughts about contentment, thoughts about light, thoughts about silence, thoughts about love. These kind of thoughts, we call these high quality thoughts. And this is how the true self sustains itself, because the true self is a it's a completely different world where these tiny points of light, but within this tiny point of light, there's a whole universe that's completely different from the outside world. It has the energy of peace, and it has the energy of love. It has the energy of bliss. And so when we have thoughts about these qualities, we trigger that energy and it makes us feel light. So that's how the true self sustains itself on very high quality energy. The ego, on the other hand, is into acquisition. It wants to acquire more. The ego believes that more is better. If I can have more, let's say I introduce myself to you and I say, I'm a meditation teacher. I've done 500 classes and I have 1,000 students and I have 2,000 likes on Facebook. This is how the ego might want to introduce itself. The ego likes numbers. It likes acquisition. It likes quantity. The higher self, the true self, loves quality, these very good, high quality, high vibrational thoughts. That's what the higher self loves. But the ego loves quantity. It loves accumulating. It's a consumer. So this is how I introduce myself. 500 classes, 1,000 students, 2,000 likes on Facebook. And then let's say I look at the Facebook page from Global Harmony House and I see 5,000 likes. So now I don't feel so good about myself anymore because the ego compares numbers all the time. It compares acquisitions all the time. Now I'm ashamed of myself. I've only got 2,000 likes. I hope nobody in New York knows that I only have 2,000 likes. This is the way the ego talks to itself in these very low quality thoughts, low frequency vibrations. And this is what makes us feel heavy, this ego talk. And we could say, well, I'm a failure as a meditation teacher. No, it's my thoughts. It's the thoughts that I'm having about myself. I'm having thoughts about failure, and then I experience failure. If I have thoughts about success, then I experience success. So the higher self, because it's in the moment, it's not comparing. Higher self isn't into numbers. The higher self doesn't really even recognize numbers, the true self. True self is in the moment. What kind of experience can I, the soul, have with all of these souls who are embodied in New York? This is the kind of thinking of the true self. And so the true self wants to contribute. The true self wants to share. The true self wants to learn. The true self wants to have fun. But if the ego is in control, the ego says later for the fun. Right now we have to excel. This is the way. So the ego kind of takes the fun out of things, even out of things that are fun. So this is another difference between the true self and the ego self. Now, another difference, and I've kind of touched upon this, but the ego bases its version of reality on the material world. All it knows is the material world, and all it believes is the material world. The ego can't grasp even the moment. It's too subtle for the ego. The ego wouldn't know how to live in the moment. And the ego makes predictions based on its own statistics, its own data from the past. Whereas the higher self, it, as I said, it's its own world. And so the higher self believes truth. That's its benchmark, truth. The ego is interested in proof, physical, material proof. And the higher self is interested in truth. So the higher self will look within. The higher self has this amazing mechanism called the conscience. And the conscience kind of tells us, or some people call it intuition. And so it doesn't have to go out and collect a lot of data. It has this inbuilt ability to sense what is good. And good meaning what is aligned with its own qualities. And so the true self doesn't have to have so many thoughts. And in particular, it doesn't have to have all of these thoughts that make us feel heavy. Now, definitely the true self has to do its research in the world, but it's not doing that in order to feel good. The true self goes within and feels good because it has all the qualities. Peace is a quality, an innate quality. Love is an innate quality. If I'm experiencing love inside, definitely I'm going to feel good. Bliss is a quality. If I'm experiencing bliss inside, definitely I'm going to feel good. So the true self takes care of itself, makes itself well, comes from a place of being well, and then it goes and it brings that wellness into whatever it does. So things can be difficult. People could disagree with me. It might not be an easy day, but if I'm going into the day with my own personal wellness, then I can deal with all of this. And it's not going to get me down, might a little bit, but it's not going to make me heavy at the end of the day. At the end of the day, the true self can say, well, this was a difficult day, but this went well. I learned this. Tomorrow I'm going to do this better. This is actually the reason why we meditate in the morning, many of us, right? Because we don't know what kind of day it's going to be. So we fill ourselves with this positive energy so that we can sustain ourselves, create our own goodness, sustain our own wellness during the day, and not be dependent on the outside world, which is what the ego is. The ego is dependent. The ego doesn't create its own wellness. The higher self is a creator. The ego is a consumer. So the ego is going into the day preparing to do everything very well. But the ego will need a certain kind of result, and then that result will give him a sense of well-being. The ego depends on results for its sense of well-being. It consumes well-being. So, very different sources of information, right? The ego is getting its information, getting its wellness out there where everything is changing, nothing is predictable. It's trying to control it all, but it really can't. And then the true self is looking at this eternal resource bank of good qualities which never go away. They're always there. And that's how it creates its well-being. So we're looking at these two characters who have very different views of the self, of life, of the world. So we can see sometimes we can see this is a real odd couple, right? The true self and the ego, a real odd couple. You wonder how they can even live together in the same space. And of course, sometimes one predominates, sometimes the other predominates, and sometimes real disagreements emerge. Which direction should I go? Sometimes we get paralyzed by indecision. But another thing that can happen is the ego, when a disagreement arises, remember the ego needs to control. And so the ego speaks loudly, or the ego might just keep repeating things endlessly, or the ego might collect even more data, even more evidence to promote its point of view. And the true self speaks very, very quietly. And in order for the true self to be heard, there has to be inner silence. And this is another reason we meditate, so that we can stop all this noise and hear the true voice of the inner self. So how do we lighten up? Because many of us have demanding jobs. Life in general is demanding. It's very complex. It's expensive. Lots of people who we have to please. So how do we lighten up? The first step in, of course, one thing that we can do is, let's say I'm having heavy thoughts. I had some heavy thoughts because I need something done on the roof and of the building, and I've contacted some people for an estimate, and for some reason nobody wants to make an estimate. So the ego, which is fundamentally insecure, says, well, the reason they don't want to make an estimate must be because this is a really dangerous and risky job and nobody's going to want to do this job. That's what the ego says. So I can lighten up by saying, well, let's think positive. Let's call a few more companies and get an estimate. And I can get over this hurdle this way. But this isn't what I'm talking about at the moment. What I'm talking about at the moment is, how do we raise the quality of lightness of our life globally, make ourselves lighter, more enlightened. So there's a few steps to this, 4 steps. The first step is to notice where my thoughts are coming from, and do this on a consistent basis. Remind myself every now and then, where are my thoughts coming from? Are these thoughts coming from the true self, or are they thoughts from the ego, which is representing this material being, the constructed Mary? Where are the thoughts coming from? And sometimes it's difficult to know, but one clue which I use is, are my thoughts about my possibilities, or are my thoughts about my limitations? And if I'm over focusing on my limitations, or the limitations of the world, or what's never going to work, or what is too expensive, if I'm focusing on this level, it tells me these thoughts are coming from the ego. If my thoughts are about my possibilities, well, what if we tried this? What's another way that we could do this? Here's a good quality that we could put into this situation. What's another quality that I could combine with this quality for better success? These are the kind of thoughts that the true self has. The true self sees possibilities. The ego self sees limitations. And it's the reality. They inhabit different realities. The true self in reality has endless possibility. And the ego is limited to what it has experienced in the past. So this is the first step. I have to notice where my thoughts are coming from. And then if I notice that my thoughts are coming from the ego self, as I did recently when I was thinking about this roofing job, then I have to get myself out of that mode of thinking. Frequently we quote Albert Einstein saying, you can't solve a problem from the same consciousness that created it. And so definitely the ego consciousness is very good at creating problems, and the true self consciousness is good at solutions. So I realize this, that I'm experiencing life to be a problem. Got to go to the other consciousness. So a very simple phrase, such as, I am a peaceful being. Sometimes I say this to myself. Sometimes I say Om Shanti, which means the same thing. And I say it maybe a few times, because this takes me now into the moment. If I'm thinking these pessimistic thoughts, I'm surrounded by all of this baggage from my past, basically. Why would I have pessimistic thoughts? I've never even had this kind of a situation before. There's no need to, I have no experience. But all of this baggage from the past is weighing me down and making me heavy. So I've got to get into the moment. I am a peaceful soul. Pause. Feel the peace. Slow down. Take a couple of deep breaths. I am a being of light. It just takes maybe 1 minute. It might seem like a long minute, but it puts me in the moment. It takes me out of the past. And actually, all that's real is the moment. And then I can say, okay, now that I'm in the moment, what kind of moment would I like to create? I can create a joyful moment. I can create a contented moment. I can create a encouraging moment. Whatever kind of moment I want to create, I say that word and let myself experience it. Now I'm in the moment a little bit longer. Tranquil moment, happy moment. So in that, I call it an intentional moment. It is my intention that this moment be tranquil. Let myself experience some tranquility. And then, just 1 minute maybe, then hold that intention, hold that feeling, hold that being in the moment, and then go back to this roofing situation and do what you have to do. But do it with the awareness that lightness, first of all, lightness is an intrinsic quality of the soul. So I always have the option to be light. And the second thing is lightness is a choice, but I have to actively make the choice. I have to reject heaviness. I have to choose lightness, choose to connect with that energy. And the third thing is that lightness is going to come from being content. So I have to take my awareness into this inner world, which is full. Just these three things. And another practice which helps me stay light is the practice of appreciation. Appreciate that everything happens, everything that happens, there is potential for growth, potential for learning, potential for benefit. And we'll have a little meditation experiment on this process of lightness in a few moments. But I think there are some questions maybe. So at this point, I will stop speaking and see if we have any questions.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Sister Mary. That was just I have thumbs up, 2 thumbs up. A lot of good nuggets. It's kind of like, when you're a prospector looking for gold, sifting among the sand. You gave me quite a few nuggets. I took some notes that I am going to use because a lot of this seems so subtle, but you were able to put it into very practical form. And it's funny when you mentioned that you have a brother that told you to lighten up. Maybe we have the same lokic brother, because I had a brother as well, and he actually lived in Chicago, who also used to say that I was intense and high strung.
Mhm.
And I thought at that time it was baked into me. In other words, that I was hardwired for that. But through practice, I don't think he'd recognize me now. He's passed on. But,
Yeah.
you can make choices if you work at it. So people notice. So I thought that was a lovely story because we had the same.
Yeah. Maybe everybody has a brother like that.
Yeah. Yeah. But I
And
love.
God bless those brothers.
Exactly. Every once in a while I do get excited, but it comes from a different place. That
Yeah.
passion. It's, I am,
Yeah.
but it's not as high strung. I'm kind of light. I
Mm.
am a little lighter. So, but it takes work, but it's good work. So there are a few questions, and actually I'm happy to say one of the questions ties into some of my questions that I had. And one of the questions from the audience was, how do you deal with the fear and anxiety around people? You spoke a lot about situations, and it was very compelling and helpful. But I think what I'm hearing from some of the questions, it seems to center on relationships and people that we meet. So how would you deal with fear and anxiety around people? Is it the same mechanisms? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I would say it's the same mechanism in that the basis of it is this insecurity that we have developed over life because we haven't always been able to meet expectations. And sometimes the fear and anxiety, I know I've felt intimidated by people and had a lot of fear and anxiety about those people and wanted to avoid them actually because of that intimidation. And so part of it has been dealing with my own feelings of insecurity and realizing that the majority of what's going on is I am having to deal with my feelings from the past. It's not what the other person is doing. It's how I'm responding to it. And the other part of it is what we call this practice of soul consciousness. And when I'm avoiding a person for any reason, whether I feel intimidated by that person or whether I feel that person is deceitful or I feel that person is boring, whatever it is, I practice seeing that person as an elevated soul. And in my meditation, I give that soul, I see the soul first of all, and I give the soul respect and regard, respect and regard, respect and regard. And then the next thing that I have to invoke is the quality of humility, because whether I feel intimidated by a person or I feel superior, it's the same thing, it's arrogance. And so I invoke that quality of humility and again, along with the respect and regard. And then I see myself cooperating. And I just tell myself, the most important thing for me at this moment is to be able to feel a connection with this other soul. And there's a resistance inside. There's a like, no, I don't want to connect because I might get hurt in some way. And so it takes courage. It takes courage, but also in this state of mind that we call soul consciousness in the Brahma Kumaris, it's all about exchanging spiritual energy. And ultimately, what satisfies the soul is living according to his own truth. And if I ever want to feel good about myself, that's what I'm going to have to do.
I think you answered the next question because it was almost like a part B. I don't know if it's the same person that asked, but I think your last statement just answered it. But I'll just, because they asked, how do you deal with what others think of you? And that, I think without knowing, I think you kind of answered it, that what,
Yeah.
be sure of
Yeah.
yourself and
It's,
to go,
yeah.
not to have the ego answer for you, but to go back to your true self, and that will fill you, and you will feel that contentment and that self-esteem. It's there. It's the others. It's the other world that makes you feel less, or that others are looking at you based on perhaps data. As you said, I love that data that the ego is constantly tattling, but half the time the data is incorrect. It's
At
not
least half.
data. It's your data.
Right. Right.
With
Yeah.
your prism. So if you'd like to speak to that, how do you deal with what others think of you?
Yeah, and I will say that's a really big issue. And even though I've been meditating for 33 years, I still experience that. And it was kind of funny today. I had a class at noon, and it's one that I do every day at noon. No big deal. But when I thought of this class, with all of these souls in New York who I don't know, I had this came up again. Well, what are they going to think of me? Will they like me? Am I as good as the
We
teachers in New
like you. We like you. You're okay. You could stay.
York? And so, and so I had to realize, it's not about me, actually. There was the topic, and I'm the instrument who was selected for whatever reason to present this topic, and the topic will get presented.
Mhm. Mhm.
And if I can connect, and these souls will definitely get something out of it.
Right.
But in this ego consciousness, this character named Mary, it's so important. And society really reinforces that, you are what other people think of you. And so it takes a lot of practice to just surrender to the ultimate goodness of humanity and say, I'm here, I'm going to show up, I'm going to do my best, and that's all that matters.
In terms of definition, someone asks, is the ego and the mind the same?
Yeah, good question. And ego has a lot of different meanings. So, for example, I was a psych major, and in psychoanalytic theory, the ego is the rational part of the self. But in spirituality, it's a slightly different. In spirituality, the ego is the part of the self that identifies with and deals with the material world, identifies with. So in spirituality, the reality is that we actually are not part of the material world. We're beings from another dimension of light, and we've come here and we're in these bodies, but we're going to leave sometime. But the mind is an ability of the soul. Ego is constructed. I created this ego, but the mind is eternally there. It's a part of consciousness. And in Raja Yoga, we see the mind is just a screen, that the thoughts, energy flowing across a screen. That's what thoughts are. And there's another part of consciousness in Raj Yoga, which we call, the way that we define the intellect is this this understanding, evaluating, creative part of consciousness that can look at what's happening on my mind and challenge it and say, is this true? Is this appropriate? Is this beneficial?
Discerning, that could discern the difference, which is so
Discerning, right,
important in
right.
spirituality, to know the difference between the physical and the spiritual. There's the rub, that work to experience that, and with practice, like anything else, that you will get to taste it, and you'll know it when you taste it. And I think that's well, we're going to ask you, because you're going to do a meditation for us a little longer which is a treat for us. So let me just see if there's any more last minute questions, because we want to give you time. Oh, well, we have a positive comment. We like what Mary said about the odd couple living in one space, and you explained both characters. Thank you, Mary. So you're getting you're getting rave reviews on our chat. So thank you. And with that, we're going to shut down the questions and we're going to turn now to a meditation. I ask everyone stays for a couple of announcements afterwards. So thank you, Mary. And if you
Okay.
don't mind, thank you.
All right. To begin with, sit up straight and take a few deep, easy breaths. Let the breath become a little slower, a little deeper, and be in the moment, just observing your breath. Be aware that you, the conscious being, are observing the body breathing. Just enjoy the observation. With the awareness that you, the observer, are very powerful. Now, as you exhale, let the body relax. This is one power of the soul. The soul can manage the body so that it functions better. Now, as you exhale, let the mind relax. This is another power of the soul. The soul can manage the inner world so that it functions better. See yourself as a little being of light, invisible, but definitely there behind the forehead. Tiny being of light. But inside this tiny point of light is an entire world of light. Inside this inner world is the energy of peace. Let that energy of peace circulate. This is a true, innate, eternal energy of the soul. Peace. Whenever we're peaceful inside, we're feeling our own truth. And light. The inner world is a world of light. When we experience ourselves this way, it opens up a whole new dimension, a whole vast dimension of light is open to us when we see ourselves as souls. This dimension of light is the home of a soul, where the soul came from before it came into this world, and the same place that the soul returns to from time to time. See yourself, just the soul, no body, just a being of light. See yourself in an endless dimension of light. A dimension that is completely silent, blissful, and you are absolutely free and light, in this dimension. There are no objects, nothing to do, not even anything to think about. Just pure being. A moment of freedom. And in this dimension, there is a supreme soul, meaning a soul who never changes. A soul who is never heavy, eternally light, eternally loving, eternally peaceful. So a very charismatic soul, pure soul. And let yourself be drawn towards that being of the purest light. For a moment, let yourself be filled with that light that is peaceful, loving, blissful. Everything that nourishes a soul is in that light. And then bring your awareness back now to this body that you inhabit with a clear awareness that you're not part of the body. You belong to that world of light. This body is your instrument, your gift, but it's not you. You are eternal, eternally in the moment. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Hope you'll join us again. That was, I didn't want to come back, but all right, I will. So thank you so much, Sister Mary, for a lovely conversation and insights that we will use. I know I'm going to retype this. You know, for myself, because a lot of them, there are a lot of things, a lot of jewels I'm going to use right away. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Brother Eric, and thank you, Sister Inez and Global Harmony House for these wonderful Thursday evening conversations. And next week, we are back on December 10th. Our topic is 1 minute of patience, 1 minute, that's all it takes, and you get 10 years of peace. And that's a Greek proverb, and we're going to delve into that. So certainly we can have 1 minute of patience for 10 years of peace. And also on December 17th, if you've had the joy of having participated in this year it'll be online, our holiday program. I know I've done that for a number of years with a number of others, very talented people. So I can't wait to see what we're going to do for a holiday program. That's on December 17th. And just another reminder, we will have an online New Year's program on Thursday, December 31st, or 6:30 to 8 o'clock. So with that, I'm going to bid farewell. Thank you so much, Sister Mary.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for the conversation, for the opportunity to share. It's a wonderful program that you have, and
Yeah, we do. We put together a whole team of people behind this and
great.
a lot of leadership. So thank you again. And
Great.
good night, everyone. And
Okay.
be well. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Michelle. Thank everybody for coming. We'll see you next week. Have a great week, and may it be full of insight.